North Dakota Republicans are trying to force public school students to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I didn't even know we were still arguing about this, but they are in North Dakota. Here is the bill that they are trying to pass. It's House Bill 1222. It's introduced by a whole bunch of politicians. Every single one of them is Republican. And I want to show you certain passages of this bill because here's what here's what North Dakota's law says right now. Okay, let me show you this. Number 5 is the part that matters. A school board may authorize the voluntary recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance by a teacher or one or more students at the beginning of each school day. A student may not be required to recite the pledge, stand during the recitation of the pledge, or salute the American flag. Now, all of that makes sense to me. You can do the Pledge of Allegiance in public school. You can do it over the loudspeaker. You could have teachers or students lead the class in the pledge. But as this law says, no one has to say it. You can remain seated during it. As long as you're not disruptive while other people say it, you're fine. That's pretty much the law everywhere in the country when it comes to the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, what does this bill hope to do? It wants to change the section I am reading you right now. This part of the law, number 5, is what they want to change. Let me show you what the bill would change it to. Here's what the bill proposes. I know it's a lot here. Just notice what they're crossing out. Instead of saying a school board may authorize the voluntary recitation, it says a student of a public school shall recite the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of each school day. You got to say it. You don't want to? Too bad. A student must be informed by written notice. Okay, you got in the handbook or something else, it says it has to say you can be excused from saying the Pledge of Allegiance upon written request by the student's parent or legal guardian. This is interesting. Let's just talk about this for a second. The only way you can get out of saying the pledge, if this bill were to become law, is if your parents gave you permission to do it. Think about that for a second. Let's say I am in high school in North Dakota, and I happen to be a 14, 15-year-old atheist. And I don't want to stand for the pledge because it says under God, and I don't believe we're a nation under God. You think I'm going to go to my parents and say, hey, mom, dad, I don't want to say the pledge. Also, I know I'm brown and I'm supposed to we're a good immigrant family. But I don't want to say the pledge. I want to stay seated. And also, by the way, I'm an atheist and that's why I don't want to say. You think any of that's going to fly? You think they're going to write me a permission slip to get out of doing that? No, they're not going to do that. Do you know how hard it would be for a student to have the support of their parents to take this rebellious act of not saying the pledge? Most of the students who would want to sit would not be able to get that permission. How many of your parents agree with your politics? That's why they're doing this. They're saying, look, we're giving you an out. You don't have to say it, but we're making you overcome this giant hurdle, which, by the way, this has been litigated before. And like the courts have said, no, you don't need parent permission. If you don't want to say it, no one can force you to say it because the government can't force you to do something like that against your will. You don't need a permission slip to not do it. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. That's what the law says. But this law says, hey, kids, the only way you can get out of saying the pledge is if your parents write a note. Awful. Illegal. Shouldn't be doing that, but that's what they say. What else do we have in here? During the Pledge of Allegiance, any unexcused students, the ones who don't have a permission slip, you have to show full respect to the flag by standing at attention with your right hand over your heart. And for men, remove any headdress unless it's for religious purposes. And okay, fine, I'm going to let that part slide. But they're basically saying if you don't have a parent permission slip, you at the very least have to stand up and do this. You can't remain seated even if you only want to mouth the words. So that's what this bill would do. They're forcing kids to say the pledge against their will. And if you don't have opt-out permission, what are you going to do? I don't know what happens, by the way, if your parents do sign a permission slip. Let's say you are excused. What happens? Are you allowed to sit in the classroom while everyone else says the pledge? Is the teacher going to kick you out of the classroom saying, oh, little Billy's parents signed the pledge paperwork, so Billy, get out. You're not wanted in this classroom while the rest of us good people say the pledge. Like, how much ostracization is there going to be for the students who get permission not to say it? I have no idea. The bill doesn't specify. What happens if a student who doesn't have a permission slip doesn't want to say the pledge? What if they remain in their seats? What is the punishment going to be for that student? Because right now, what they're doing by sitting down, that is legal. But if this bill were to pass, what punishment are they going to give to that kid? The bill doesn't specify any punishment. So is the school going to punish them for not saying the pledge? I don't know. It's very confusing because they haven't thought this thing through. Doesn't make any sense. One other thing I want to show you about this this bill. Look at one other section here. I'm going to scroll up. In addition to them saying how we got to change the pledge, look at this section. Immunity from liability. Years ago, North Dakota passed a law basically saying, hey, schools, if you want to put up a 10 Commandments poster in the school, as long as it's part of a display with, the Magna Carta and the Declaration of Independence, you're allowed to do that if you want to. But when they passed that, they said in this law, the superintendent, school districts, schools, school boards, and individual school board members, and all these people involved, all the adults involved in a school, are immune from any liability for damages if anyone sues you over the 10 Commandments display thing. And this bill would amend that law to say, oh, and if they sue you over the Pledge of Allegiance, all of you are immune. It's like they know they're going to get a lawsuit over this from some parent. And they're trying to say, don't worry, school adults, none of you are going to be in trouble. Let the kids suffer. Doesn't matter. It's like they're anticipating the lawsuit already, right? This is the kind of bill you file because you don't care about public education. You don't care about doing what's best for students. You file it because you're waging war with public schools while trying to make a political statement to an insane group of voters who claim to be patriotic while trying to destroy our democracy. I find the Pledge of Allegiance hilarious in part because if you actually love the country, you should not be forced to say a pledge to it and how much you love it. If someone had to say to me every day, I love you, but they were forced to do it under threat of punishment, I think all of us would understand, okay, that didn't really count. But that's what Republicans want. They think symbolic acts of patriotism done at knife point are the same as true patriotism because they don't understand what patriotism is. If Republicans ever did the sort of things that inspired people to actually love the country, maybe they would get it. But they've spent so many decades just trying to hurt as many different groups of people as possible. They have no clue what it's like when you actually inspire people to love the country. Now, look, I've made an entire podcast series about the history of the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll post a link somewhere, but just to give you some reasons why the Pledge of Allegiance is such a bad idea in general, let me just run through some of the big reasons. I already mentioned the Pledge of Allegiance says under God. That was added in 1954. It should not be there. It was put there for political reasons, but it says under God. If you're an atheist, you might not want to say a pledge that we are one nation under God, indivisible. And of course, the irony there is the pledge used to say we were one nation, indivisible, and then they decided to divide us with under God. But that's not the only reason. The pledge suggests falsely that we have liberty and justice for all. And as that is actually one reason that many Black students have protested the pledge, because they know that's not true. Another reason to not like the pledge is that the reason it was written in the first place, I'm sure you've heard the story about how the pledge was written by like a Baptist minister, and isn't that interesting? And he wrote it without under God. Well, guess what? That Baptist minister who wrote the pledge hated immigrants. He was not a good dude. And the reason the pledge says this at the beginning, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The subtext there is, hey, people coming to the United States from other countries, stop loving your flag. You're here now. You better like our flag, and you better not say anything nice about the flag of the country from where you came. Like, that's not okay. And frankly, the last reason you shouldn't like the pledge, the United States is not always a country that deserves admiration. We do a lot of really horrible shit around the world, and the rest of the world knows it, and they make fun of us for it. Rightly so, by the way. Every time you go to a foreign country and you tell them you're an American, and their reaction is like, oh no, ask them about it, because they'll tell you all the problems they have with America, and they're usually right about it. But like, why should we pledge allegiance to a nation that is so often a global embarrassment? I wish our country did things we could be proud of, but most of the time we are not doing that. And again, none of these North Dakota Republicans care. They want to force kids to fake their patriotism by reciting propaganda, religious propaganda, because their whole brand of MAGA-driven politics is incapable of earning that respect on their own merits. If you have to force someone to say they love the country, it doesn't count. And it's also a slap in the face to their history teachers, who apparently, I guess, have to say with a straight face, like, yeah, we're free in this country, and you're allowed to protest in this country, unless it comes to the Pledge of Allegiance, in which case you have to say it or else. I wanted to show you one other thing just about the Pledge of Allegiance, because I always find this fascinating. When I was doing research on that podcast series I made about the Pledge of Allegiance years ago, one of the stories I came across that I did not personally know about at the time, it was about a little boy named Hubert Eves, and he was 11 years old, and he was black. And in 1916, over a century ago, this kid did not want to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and he got arrested for it. He was 11. He got arrested for it. And there was a whole article about this in the newspaper. Look at the headline here. I'll scroll up for a second. Hubert Eves refuses to salute U.S. flag. Youngster, 11 years old, starts new philosophy of American patriotism. And I want to scroll down and show you one thing here. There's Hubert right there. But look at this section right here. To a Chicago Defender reporter, look at what this kid said. He said, he's 11. Isn't it wrong to have me bowing and worshiping a flag that is a dirty flag? One that does not give my mother and father protection? A flag that represents a government that allows Jim Crow cars, segregation in all public places in the South and other parts of the country, denies us a voice in state government, and who practices grandfather clauses and lets mobs take our people out and hang them without trial, show us no mercy in the courts, deny us the proper school education, disfranchises our people, winks an eye at Southern concubinage, ostracizes us in every way. The Defender reporter was writing as fast as he could, but he had to stop and look at the boy and ask him about his parents. And young Eves said, I have a good mother and father, and I've been very obedient. I love that story. But also that kid from 1916 was absolutely right about all of that. Why would you want to pledge your allegiance to a nation that does all that stuff? It's horrible. So for now, this North Dakota bill that has been proposed, HB 1222, it has been referred to the House Education Committee. Interestingly enough, it's North Dakota. It's overrun with Republicans. On that committee are 14 members. 12 of them are Republicans, and 2 of them are co-sponsors of this bill, including that committee's chair, which means this bill will probably get voted on, and it might get up to the House, and there's a very good chance this bill could pass. So this could be an issue months down the line. We'll see. All right, I'm going to pause there. I have one more story for you after this, but what questions we got? So this opens up grounds for shame, peer pressure, and bullying. Absolutely right. Like, if you have to sit out of the classroom or stay seated while the pledge is happening, yeah, you're going to be outcast. And it's not cool for schools to do that to children as young as kindergarten, for whatever the reasons are. By the way, I should have mentioned this. The original lawsuits to say we should not have to say the Pledge of Allegiance did not come from atheists, did not come from Black students. It came from Jehovah's Witnesses who said, I have a religious obligation not to worship false idols, and the flag is an idol. I don't want to worship that. And so they're the ones who got the victory in the Supreme Court in the 40s? I think it's the 40s. A bunch of, thank you, Jehovah's Witnesses, atheist parents like mine, and some First Nation people would definitely write permission letters. And you know what? That's great. But also, no one should have to get their parents to write permission letters to get out, for their kids to get out of saying the pledge. You should not have to do that. Kids should be allowed to make up their own minds about the pledge. I think it's fair to say if you don't want to say the pledge, you don't have to. Stay seated, be respectful, don't disturb anyone else, but no one should make you say it against your will or even stand up and put your hand over your heart. No, it's the same thing. I thought Republicans didn't want schools making decisions on behalf of parents without express consent from the parents, not an opt out of our policy system. That's a very good point. Republicans are all for small government unless it involves something they totally want you to do, in which case they're going to force you to do it. And also, yeah, if your parents disagree about it or something, well, guess what? They don't care about what you think. They're only working on behalf of white evangelical Christian parents who don't want their kids learning condoms and, I don't know, same-sex marriage exists. Sounds like they want to make a case to make it to SCOTUS to overrule students' rights. That's possible that this is where this is going. Usually with this Supreme Court, they don't like cases that are so blatantly illegal. Like, this one is almost more to do with freedom of speech than religion. And so I don't know that this is the case you would want to do if you want to make kids say the pledge. Like, but it's true. They're probably doing this because they think they can get away with it. They're pushing this bill for the same reason Louisiana Republicans passed a law to put the 10 Commandments in public school classrooms, because they thought they could get away with it. And they hope this gets up to the Supreme Court. And in Louisiana, so far, they've been unsuccessful, but they have appealed the decision. And so we haven't heard the final say yet. So yeah, it's a fair point. Maybe North Dakota Republicans are doing this because they just hope the Supreme Court will come around and say, yeah, kids, you got to say the Supreme Court, say the Pledge of Allegiance because freedom.